issues or more of the economic issues. Somebody else will defend maybe civil liberties to some degree in the First Amendment. But they don't come together because we should bring it together. The issue is liberty. And if you bring liberty together and you have a natural right to it, you don't even ask what you're going to, the other people who accept the principle, you don't ask them, what are you going to do with your liberty? That's like saying, well, if you get a job and work, I'm not going to ask you how you're going to spend your money, but you're obligated to spend it wisely and take care of yourself, and you can't, depend on others if you don't do a good job. In a free society, we should all come together, not because of how we're going to use our liberties, because some people misuse their liberty. But that doesn't mean that we have to accept that. Just because they misuse it or do things that we don't like, that doesn't mean we endorse what they do. What we have to do is endorse the principle of liberty, and we should all come together and use it as we see fit with the rule of don't hurt or injure anybody else. And that means that we should all come together, and the crowds that come together for the defense of liberty should be and have been very diverse, and that's how we solve so many of our problems. Too many others have assumed that our certain freedoms and privileges come because we belong to a particular group. I don't buy into that. I think it's absolutely wrong to have punished, as this country has punished certain groups because they were denied because they belong to that group. But the answer to it isn't giving people privileges because they belong to a group. Everything has to be individual, and we have to treat everybody equal. We have to have equal justice under the law for each and every individual. That's right. And I've had a lot of complaints. I think you all know that I'm not exactly a fan of the drug war. I think the drug war has cost us $3 or $4 trillion in the last 40 to 50 years. And guess what? There's still a lot of bad drugs out there. There's a lot of addictions. I don't like the idea of saying drug addiction is a crime. It should be treated as alcohol and treated as a disease. But the bigger problem in this country when it's misuse of drugs, believe it or not, it's prescription drugs that are a bigger problem than the illegal drugs. But the drug war has been used to undermine our civil liberties. There's been too many SWAT teams busting into houses they shouldn't be busting into, too many people, innocent people dying, and it has been as an excuse to invade our privacy. And this is the reason that we have to look at that whole issue of who's supposed to protect us against ourselves. We teach our children about the dangers, automobiles and fires and all the other things. We should have that responsibility as well. If I thought for a minute, though, that they had a perfect society and nobody was inclined to misuse drugs and do all the problems that come, it'd be a little harder. It's sort of like the economic argument. They don't create perfect economic conditions, but they don't create better moral behavior either. That comes from within the family and the community and the church, not from the federal government bearing down on us. But the last 10 years, not only has our foreign policy gone astray, and we are involved now in about 900 bases to 130 countries, and we're in such a mess. But in the last 10 years, the attack on civil liberties have been atrocious. After 9/11, which was a horrible, horrible day, but I think they misunderstood 9/11. I don't believe for a minute that we were attacked because we're free and prosperous. There's a lot more to it than that. But guess who was attacked immediately after? Yes, we went over in Afghanistan and got involved in wars that had nothing to do with 9/11, and it took 10 years to find that one ringleader and get rid of him. But guess who got the attack? It was the American people. Amen. The American people got attacked by the passage of that very onerous Patriot Act that needs repeal. I am convinced that if that bill had been called Repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, it wouldn't have passed. So when we get around to repealing it, we're not going to say that we're going to repeal the Patriot Act. We're going to say, restore the Fourth Amendment to this country. It's sad, but our attack on our liberties, the foreign policy, the monetary policy, and the welfare state, tragically, has been too much bipartisan. I'd like to say that the party that I'm running in is the savior and is going to produce it, but that isn't going to be the answer because our problems have been bipartisan. Too long. Matter of fact, sometimes the people say, well, Ron, you can't do it because you won't compromise. Well, there's been way too much compromise in Washington between the two parties coming together, spending the money and going into these wars. So, but what else has happened? The president assumes that he's a king. He's decided that by edict, because he's the commander-in-chief, that he has the authority under certain circumstances that he can assassinate an American citizen. And he's done it to prove this point. He's done it 3 times. And where has been the outcry? I hear it from the crowds. But just think, we've had how many debates? Depends on how you count. I think it's about 22 if you count every single one of them. That issue never comes up. About civil liberties, the protection of privacy, assassinations, all these things, totally ignored. They do not bring this up at all. So, but also the federal, the Congress hasn't done much good in stopping it. They don't resist what the president does. Matter of fact, in December, they delivered to the president the National Defense Authorization Act. The president celebrated the new year, January 1st. He signed the bill. And of course, that is the bill that gives the president explicit authority that he can use the U.S. military to violate posse comitatus to arrest American citizens. In secret, put away in secret prisons, denied an attorney, and kept indefinitely. That is not what America should be all about. We need to change it. The number one issue that most people claim is the issue, and I believe it is a big issue, and that is the economy. The economy is very, very weak, and there's a claim that things are improving right now, but quite frankly, my own belief is that 6 months to a year, you're going to have people admitting that we're back in a recession because the statistics are superficial. They deny the truth. Even the calculation of unemployment is fiction. The real unemployment is closer to 20%. The real inflation rate, Bernanke says he can only steal 2% of your money per year, the value of your money, and he still thinks that's moral. But it's much more than that. The free market economists that use the old calculation of CPI, we're losing the value of our currency at 6%, and it's bound to get a lot worse. Just think of what's happening now with energy prices, and gasoline prices are going up. So that is a result of the inflation. A lot of people say, well, Bernanke will argue that, well, there's no inflation because he measures the CPI and then he fudges on the CPI. But the inflation is when they increase the money supply and distort the interest rate and distort the investments. And we have plenty of that. One of the consequences will be the prices going up. Educational costs going up, medical care costs going up, energy prices going up, housing prices going up, NASDAQ prices going up. Then they have to have a correction. So the real problem is this whole idea that you can do central economic planning by the Federal Reserve System. Just think about money. Money is 50% of every transaction because we measure everything. All our wages and prices, everything else, are measured by dollars, and they have total control over the dollars. But it's political control, it's special interest control, it protects the very wealthy, and a characteristic of the destruction of money. When governments come in and dilute the value of money, it inevitably takes wealth from the middle class and moves it to the wealthy class. I have nothing against wealthy people who earn their living honestly by providing good goods and services. But if they're wealthy because they have the inside track to government money and they know how to work the inflation system, or they get the contracts or part of the military-industrial complex, that is not fair and right. But the real tragedy is they end up getting the bailout. So the people who complain about Wall Street, they have something very correct about it, but they have to be careful not to condemn people who earn their living, but mainly if they're earning their living illegally. But it is true The transfer of wealth occurs, and now our middle class is shrinking. It's smaller now. We had the largest middle class ever in the history of mankind, and the wealthiest. And though we didn't have a perfect society, we certainly had one that was something to brag about. But people argue the case, well, America is, an exceptional nation. And we certainly have a history that reveals a lot of exceptionalism, and we do have exceptional values. But the one thing is those who use this argument about exceptionalism say that we are so exceptional, we are so perfect, and we know everything that we ought to go and force ourselves on everybody else around the world to live like we do, and that's what's wrong. But if we restore the republic, get a good, healthy economy, have some money, defend property rights, and have a foreign policy that defends its country and not to police the world, and we set a good example where there's a lot of prosperity, more than any other country have, why wouldn't that be the best way to spread our message, by setting a standard? Then other countries would want to emulate us. But the use of force, whether it's forcing other countries to do it or forcing individuals on their lifestyle and telling people what they should do, it just absolutely contradicts everything America stands for. But we are fortunate. We are fortunate because we at least have a tradition. I believe things are going to get worse economically. I worry about the attack on our civil liberties. I worry because we don't get a lot of national attention. I get reassured when I come out here because you know what I'm talking about. I'm very pleased when I hear the positive attitude from you. But we have to realize that, when push comes to shove, it could be a tough struggle. And that is why it's ideological, and it's not one party. When the revolution comes, and it's ideas of ideological revolution, it will be bipartisan. I remember very clearly back in 1971 when Nixon got us all the gold standard and did all those things he said, well, we're all Keynesians now, and he was right. Republicans were no longer fighting for free markets. They all joined the Keynesian liberalism, inflationism, Federal Reserve System type of programs. But when we replace that, it has to be pervasive. We have to have people come together from all parties. And this is the reason that I really am optimistic, because so many places where I go and the crowds are large, a lot of time people will come, but sometimes I even ask, there could be even some Democrats here. How do we know? But sometimes they'll whisper to me as they go out, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Democrat, but I'm going to register Republican to vote for you. I always thank them, and I appreciate it very much, but I tell them, just remember, all Republicans aren't the same. Be cautious. But no, and this is where the optimism should be. And we have a lot of great things going. We have an older population that knew something about these views and got disgusted and tired and dropped out because neither party gave them any answers. And now they're coming back in the fold. Some tell me they never got involved before. Some said I quit about 20 years ago. And now they're coming back because they remember a different time and they understand what I'm talking about. But what's really exciting is this next generation. This generation is coming alive now. They're all Of course, there's a lot of stories written about that. Why should those young kids and young people be concerned? I said, well, their minds haven't been clouded up with a lot of stuff yet. They still have an open mind. They're idealistic. So, but it is great. I appreciate that very much. But I think it's coming together. It's bipartisan. It's ecumenical. But it is the key to it is like I explained. The key is freedom. But not be judgmental on how you use your freedom. That should bring everybody together for that issue alone. Freedom is a rather young idea. They accuse me, and I'm sure you've been accused of saying, "Oh, you just want to go back to the dark age, back to this silly idea of having commodity money and having a gold standard and believing in the Constitution." That's all old stuff. But you know what is old stuff? Is tyranny. Tyranny is old. Freedom is new.